Yeah, welcome back to the SportsMax Zone. We are discussing the embarrassing defeat for the West Indies to the Netherlands at the ICC World Cup qualifying tournament in Zimbabwe. The West Indies losing that game in a super over on Monday, and now their World Cup hopes hang by a thread because, they need to win their remaining 3 matches to have any shot of making it to India later this year. We're discussing the fallout from that, of course. How did we get here? How do we advance from here? How do we get better? And of course, as the assistant coach was asked on the eve of the tournament, whether we can actually get to even lower levels, even from the stage that we find ourselves. Fazir Mohammed is still with us, continuing this conversation. Faz, I just want to pick up from where we left off in that first segment. And I noted a number of things you said. One of the things that we don't have the patience to advance in the way that we need to, because quite often it just seems as if we want immediate results, high quality results, which in truth is unlikely to happen based on where we are at. And I don't want this conversation to descend too much into one about who was president before and who is president now and so on, because I think we could always have those conversations, but I don't know how much they would help. But what I do want to get at, though, is foundation and what has been laid. And one of the things for me, and it's part of the reason why I have always rated Cameron's tenure in office at Cricket West Indies, and I am not here lobbying for Dave Cameron, because clearly there are many reasons why he would have been removed from the job, well-documented reasons as well. But one of the reasons I've always appreciated his tenure in office is because there were many things that were spoken about for many years to help in the advancement of West Indies cricket that Cameron would have come and put in place. The formation of the professional league, where we have regional players outside of those in the West Indies senior setup being paid, where our female cricketers are under contract from Cricket West Indies as well. I found those as advancement. There are many individuals who, of course, would come down hard on Dave Cameron, and maybe within the overall scope, how things were done might have not been the best way. But I also certainly rated him for being able to stand up to our senior players at a time when it felt as if just maybe players wanted to dictate too much when they would play and how they would play and under what conditions they would play and so on. So I just wanted to put to you whether we have not done enough to build on the foundation that Dave Cameron would have set based on the things that I just outlined. Forget the results, forget the world titles, but just in terms of the specifics of some of the things that he would have put in place as Cricket West Indies president.
I hear you on that, and you're right. We should not be making it all about personality, because that gets us nowhere. Yeah. But just on that point that you made about the professionalization of the regional game, you know that it is fundamentally unsustainable. Or what has been presented, it really doesn't work. The territorial boards complain ad nauseum about not getting the funding that has been promised from Cricket West Indies. And again, just go back to how it came into being. That money was taken from the prominent contracted retained players that they knew nothing about until they were in India, and that resulted in the whole fiasco of the team abandoning the tour of India and the president of Cricket West Indies at the time doing nothing to prevent it. So again, because you've brought that particular issue up, is it about West Indies cricket or Dave Cameron? Is it about superhero Dave Cameron taking on the Kyron Pollards and Darren Sammies and Chris Gale and Andrew Russell and prevailing over them because it's about Dave Cameron, or is it about West Indies cricket?
Yeah. So I'm glad you went there, and let's not make it about Dave Cameron for sure. But let's have a conversation about why we have not progressed from that point. So why is it then that, 10 years on, we are still playing 4 to 6 matches in our regional first-class season? That's the first place I would start. Why is it then that we have not been able, you said it's not sustainable, I'm not sure that it's not, but why is it then we have not progressed in terms of what our regional players are being offered? Because the truth is, if our cricket is to progress, then we have to play consistent high-level cricket within the region at all age groups, from the under-15s to the under-17s to the under-19s to the seniors. So why is it then that we have not progressed from where we were 10 years ago?
Let me clarify. When I said unsustainable, I meant that not that it cannot be sustained, but the model that was presented by the Cameron administration has not been sustainable. Okay. The way it was done.
Why aren't we improving the model then, Faz?
Correct. Now, that speaks to certain self-evident realities. We are small economies, and therefore we cannot match the revenue. Certainly not India, that's out of the question. Certainly not England, certainly not Australia. The smaller economies, they have a different model. In Sri Lanka, their government interferes every 5 minutes. Pakistan, the same thing. So New Zealand might be a good model to follow. But fundamentally, it's about credibility. How many of our Caribbean businesses or conglomerates or regional conglomerates will close their eyes and put money on the table for Cricket West Indies at the developmental level? I'm not talking about sponsoring the team for 2 years or 3 years or a tournament or whatever. But how many Caribbean organizations will be willing to support if there's a proper presentation, there's a proper understanding of what is going to be done, whether you're talking about a cricket academy, because we're fixated on academy. We had a Shell Cricket Academy, we had an academy at Cavehill. We seem to think that just these magic words are going to transform everything for us. But if someone were to come out with a proper, cohesive, comprehensive program of transformation and nursery redevelopment of West Indies cricket, will Caribbean businesses come on board believing that their money will be well used, well spent, and really provide the nurturing that is necessary? I think that's a fundamental point. The entire issue of the credibility of the administration, not just of West Indies cricket, but in our Caribbean territories, or different territories as well. To me, that is a fundamental concern.
Yeah, but how do we clean that up though, Faz? Because those concerns exist. And if they are there and preventing the cricket from moving forward, then we have to address them. So how then do we address them? And if we cannot address them, should it be a case where we just pack up shop and we all go home and stop having these discussions?
Okay, as far as that is concerned, let me use a phrase that we often use here in Trinidad and Tobago. People get the government they deserve. By the same token, the people of the region have gotten the West Indies cricket that we all deserve. Some people may take great offense to it. But at the end of the day, someone says, well, what can I do? What can one individual do? Because you're immediately shouted down and so on. But at the end of the day, can we say that as Caribbean people, that we are really interested in West Indies cricket? When you gauge the reactions to a West Indies loss or a West Indies win, it's always very narrow-minded. It's always very parochial. You sit down in a taxi in Barbados and he wants 9 people in 9 pages in the team. You go to Trinidad and Tobago and they're upset that there are not 11 players from Trinidad and Tobago in the West Indies team. There's a narrow-mindedness and a one-eyed view of things. And sadly, that is reflected in our media as well. There seems to be almost an unwillingness to appreciate that what we're talking about is bigger than all of us. I know it sounds fanciful and that sort of language is probably 1960s, 1970s stuff. But maybe that is fundamentally why West Indies cricket was so successful for so long and aspired to the highest levels for so long. Because we saw something bigger than ourselves, whether Antigua or Jamaica or St. Kitts or Guyana, and we saw something called West Indies cricket, which really mattered. I don't think many of us see that anymore.
It pains me to ask you this question, Faz, because I am a lover of West Indies cricket. I've always been a lover of West Indies cricket. But I have to ask this question, and I know we've had this debate before, and it's not the first time within the last 20 or 30 years, but is it time that the islands of the Caribbean go it alone as far as cricket is concerned?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Because I've heard that from many people, both high and low. I've heard that from English commentators who, to use another Trini expression, are fast and out of place to be commenting on our Caribbean game. It's none of their so-and-so business. Because we have created our problem, we need to fix our own problems. And this idea, and even some former West Indies cricketers very, very slyly have put that discussion in, because that betrays a complete ignorance. And I don't want to go any further, because I'll get myself in trouble. That betrays a complete ignorance of what West Indies cricket is all about. And I'm not talking about loyalty to the crown and the queen and all of that foolishness. I'm talking about the sum total of very small Caribbean territories producing not just some of the best cricketers in the world, but producing teams over many generations, not just the 80s, not just the 70s, not just the 60s, but who ruled the world to a level that no one else has managed to do. So this argument that time has passed, that whole regional time has passed, and we now need to go the individual way like we saw in the CPL and Stanford and so on, that to me is a cop-out. That is basically surrendering to the immediacy. Well, we could all be parochial and be proud about it. We could all Guyana should claim test status, Trinidad and Tobago should claim test status. You recall in 2009 that the Trinidad and Tobago Cricket Board, then led by Derek Murray, refused to attend an annual general meeting because they were unhappy with the administration of the game. And that was interpreted as an attempt to break away, although it wasn't. But again, it just reinforces the point that we are so parochial, we are so narrow-minded, that the few who understand this thing called West Indies cricket just drowned out by the foolishness.
Yeah, I hear you, Faz. I completely hear you, and it's not that I disagree with you, but I hear a lot of what you're saying, and I'm thinking to myself, where is the fix? Because I'm starting to struggle even more following this conversation to figure out how we fix where we are. And so I guess the next question for me is, do you see things getting better anytime soon? And you're depressing me, Faz.
Yeah, but I think Faz. Yeah, I think Faz touched on something earlier on there, because funding is a major issue. And for the sport to be developed, huge investment financially has to be injected in West Indies cricket from all levels. Not only, developing players, but developing infrastructure, developing playing facilities and so on. And I get where Fazir was going earlier on, that there is no funding for that at the moment. And until we sort that part out, I think we'll be, just swimming upstream.
But isn't it the responsibility of each territorial board to source the funding to assist with the development of the sport within each territory? Now, it may differ depending on whichever island. So, for example, here in Jamaica, a lot of the development takes place through the school system. And so you have the Intersecondary School Sports Association that sources funding to have its respective competitions, and that's where you have a lot of the development taking place at all age groups. It may differ in Trinidad and Tobago, in Barbados, and so on. But ultimately, it has to be the responsibility of the individual boards who build a certain level of vibrancy around the sport, and then you are able, hopefully, to attract some level of sponsorship to help the development of the sport. And I don't know if that can be left to Cricket West Indies necessarily to do.
No, it can't. But surely Cricket West Indies, as the governing body in a real sense, not like the ICC, which is an umbrella to accommodate the big three, but in a real sense, can establish a template to say, look, this is all meant to be a feeder system, yes, to your respective territories, and you want your territories to do well, because also when West Indies was strong, the territories were strong. There was fierce competition. But the point is that ultimately it has to feed into West Indies cricket. It can't be that you're gloating that, oh, we've just won another title, we're better than everybody else in the region, and West Indies cricket is just sliding downhill. Surely, if you're an administrator who is interested in West Indies cricket, not just your territory, and you move beyond that narrow-minded perspective, that your view is the greater interest of West Indies cricket. What sadly happens is that these representatives sing one tune for the local audience, and then when they go to a regional meeting, they sing a different tune. So basically, they're speaking out of both corners of their mouth. They're speaking with forked tongues. There's not a level of sincerity and integrity in the process. And when you don't have that, this is where you end up.
Yeah, Faz, you at the start of the segment, we spoke to comments from Keith Rowley. And it is obvious that part of the reason why the West Indies has fallen to the low levels they are now is because the region is not producing enough world-class cricketers. I don't think that is in debate. You can talk a lot about Cricket West Indies, coaching, selection, and captaincy and so on, because every time the West Indies loses a match, you hear specifics being targeted, whether the coach is poor and all of that. But the quality of West Indies player today, it's obvious that the quality is below what it was 20 years ago. Significant that Keith Rowley in his statements attacked the players yesterday. When Cameron was president, he attacked Cameron when the West Indies was failing. Is it that the players have to take more responsibility for their own development and advancement as professional cricketers?
To answer both questions, as far as player responsibility, absolutely. I don't believe the player should be allowed to get off the hook because you're playing for the West Indies. If you don't understand what it means to play for the West Indies, then that is a fundamental part of the problem. Secondly, in response to that issue about the quality of our players, I'd like to challenge you there a bit, Lance, because when we look at these players individually, Shimron Hetmyer, comparisons with Clive Lloyd at one time, Nicholas Pooran, maybe a latter-day Alvin Kalicharan. Can it be argued, Lance, that essentially the players that have come out of our region, Shea Hope, so many others, Romario Shepherd and so on, have had their moments. But what has collapsed in the Caribbean is that support structure, which was informal but very effective before this present time of commercial needs and so on, which other territories, other countries have, but we don't have.
Yeah.
That the same players who we are decrying now,
yes,
if they were growing up in the 60s and the 70s, would they be as mediocre as they are now?
Well, that's a good point that you're making, because I'm on record as saying in this show up to 2 years ago that I think that Nicholas Pooran and Shimron Hetmyer, based on talent, are genuine potential world superstars. I said that many times a few years ago because of their talent. But the reason I said what I just said, if you look at their batting averages, Faz, and I take what you just said, their batting averages are in the 20s, basically. And if you compare that to our former players, whose batting averages would have been in the 40s and in many instances 50s, then there is evidence to support that these players are not as good.
Correct. And the reason is why. We seem to have reached a level of accepting a culture of mediocrity. As I said this before, forgive me for sounding repetitive, we are not Bangladesh. We're averaging 30, 35, 29 point something.
Faz, be careful.
Is okay in Test cricket.
Faz, be careful. Bangladesh will play at the World Cup later this year, and we're not sure to be there.
I'm talking Test cricket.
So maybe you are right that we are not Bangladesh.
I know where you're going with that. No, but the point I'm making is that essentially we have now accepted a culture of mediocrity. we have abandoned, because we've been into all sorts of nonsense about the burden of this legacy and so on. Do you hear the Australians talking about the burden of the legacy of Don Bradman and Dennis Lilly and Greg Chappell? Do you hear the English talking about the burden of a Fred Truman or a Jack Hobbs and Len Hutton? Do you hear the Indians saying, Gavaskar, go from here because you're a burden to us to hear about your great record against the West Indies? We have become a culture of apologists and cheerleaders. And even the basic facts and numbers don't matter. So when you present the basic numbers, making a big deal about this star player averaging 20-something or 30-something in Test cricket and saying that is not even mediocre, you're told, why are you so negative? Why are you decrying the players? Because again, we have regressed to a culture of mediocrity that is now celebrated by our administration.
Yeah, you're very much spot on there, Faz. Without a doubt. It is unfortunate the state that West Indies cricket has found itself in. We're on the verge of not qualifying for the 50-over World Cup, having not made it to the T20 World Cup last year. The embarrassment of the previous T20 World Cup, just 2 wins at the 2019 50-over World Cup, having to go through qualifying to get to that tournament. And every time we think it cannot get any lower, in the words of Carl Hooper, it certainly can go to lower levels. Fazir Mohammed, thanks very much for joining us. We'll chat again. We take a break. We'll be back with more on the SportsMax Zone.
Stay with SportsMax on YouTube and follow us on all social pages for updates, news and entertainment.